Train your mind before it's too late. The prison cell was 9 feet by 6 feet. He had measured it on the first day by walking heel to toe from the door to the wall and counting. 9 feet. He had measured the width by extending both arms. 6 feet. This was the entire territory of his physical world. 9 feet by 6 feet. A metal bed. A concrete floor. A single window too high to see through. The particular smell of a space that has housed human suffering for a very long time. He was going to be in this cell for an indeterminate period. The legal process that would eventually determine the length of his stay had not yet concluded. He was 41 years old. He had been a philosophy professor at a university that no longer wanted him, for reasons that were genuinely complex and that this particular story does not require unpacking. What the story requires is what happened inside that 9 by 6 space over the following 2 years. His name was Victor. He had taught philosophy. He had assigned texts about Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius and Seneca. He had led seminars on the Stoic conception of inner freedom. He had written papers about the relationship between circumstance and interior experience and had defended his positions in academic arguments with the specific detachment of someone who understood these ideas as intellectual objects rather than as living practices. Then his circumstances removed every external freedom he had ever taken for granted. And the philosophy he had taught was suddenly not an intellectual object. It was the only available resource. He discovered, in that cell, something that 2 decades of academic engagement with Stoic philosophy had not prepared him to discover. The difference between knowing the philosophy and having trained the mind in the philosophy. He knew it completely. Could recite it with precision. Could analyze it at any level of depth that was requested. But he had not trained himself in it. Had not built, through the daily disciplined practice that the Stoics themselves had always insisted was the point, the specific interior architecture that makes the philosophy not just known but genuinely operational. Not just understood but actually available in the moments when it is actually needed. He knew that the only genuine freedom was interior freedom. He had argued this position in print. He could not access it in practice. Because knowing and having are different in exactly the way that the Stoics always said they were different and that he had always agreed with them about and had never actually tested. The first 6 months in that cell were, by his own later account, the most psychologically difficult of his life. Not because the conditions were unbearable, they were genuinely difficult but not uniquely so. Because the conditions removed every external resource he had been unconsciously relying on to manage his interior life. The professional identity. The social recognition. The continuous busyness that had been preventing the interior from becoming fully visible. The specific stimulation and distraction and engagement with the external world that had been substituting for genuine interior development for 4 decades. All of it was gone. 9 by 6. The interior, unmediated by anything, fully present. And what he found in that unmediated interior was not what he had expected to find. Not the philosophical clarity that his academic engagement with these ideas had led him to believe he possessed. But the raw, largely untrained, fundamentally reactive interior of someone who had spent 40 years thinking about the practices of genuine interior development without actually engaging in them. He began to train. Not because he had a choice. Because the training was the only thing available that could make the remaining time genuinely livable rather than merely survived. 2 years later, when the legal process concluded and the cell door opened, the man who walked out was not the same person who had walked in. Not because the circumstances had improved, they were complicated in new ways that the previous circumstances had not anticipated. But because the interior that met those circumstances was genuinely, fundamentally different from the interior that had been carried into the cell. It had been trained. And the training, built under the most compressed and most demanding conditions available, had produced something that 40 years of knowing without training had not produced. A mind that was genuinely available as a resource rather than primarily as a source of difficulty. A mind that could meet what came with the specific interior tools that the Stoic philosophers had spent their entire philosophical tradition trying to make available to anyone willing to do the work. This is what we are exploring today. Completely. With the specific urgency that the story deserves. This is Stoic Ascension. Subscribe to this channel right now and turn on your notifications because every single video here is built for exactly this depth and exactly this urgency. The kind that the philosophy has always contained and that most people do not receive until the circumstances force the receiving. What comes after this builds directly on everything you are about to hear. Do not miss what is coming. Why knowing is not the same as having, the most important distinction in all of Stoic philosophy. The Stoic philosophical tradition makes a distinction that most modern self-help and personal development content consistently collapses. A distinction that is both intellectually obvious and practically revolutionary. That everyone who encounters it agrees with and that almost no one genuinely acts on. The distinction between knowing something and having trained yourself in it. Knowing is cognitive. It is the specific intellectual possession of understanding. The person who knows that the present moment is all they actually have, that their interior is the only domain of genuine freedom, that the quality of their experience is determined by the quality of their judgment rather than by the quality of their circumstances, this person possesses accurate and genuinely important information about the structure of human experience. But knowing does not change behavior. Knowing does not change the automatic responses of the nervous system when threat or loss or humiliation arrives. Knowing does not change the habitual patterns of thought that the mind has been running, largely without examination, for the entire preceding life. Knowing does not make the philosophy available in the specific moments when it is actually needed, the moments of acute stress, of genuine loss, of the specific emotional activation that bypasses the knowing and produces the same reactive, untrained response that would have occurred in its complete absence. Having trained yourself is different. It is the specific transformation of knowing into practice, into the specific behavioral and neurological patterns that the daily, consistent, genuinely engaged repetition of the practices produces. The practices are not separate from the philosophy. They are the philosophy in its genuinely operational form. The philosophy working rather than merely being known. Victor knew the philosophy with genuine academic precision and depth. He had never trained himself in it. And when the circumstances removed every external resource he had been unconsciously relying on, the gap between knowing and having revealed itself in the most complete and most uncomfortable way available. He could not access what he had not built. The knowing was there, genuinely, completely, with professional precision. But the architecture that the knowing describes, the specific interior structure of a trained mind that can meet difficulty with genuine equanimity, that can hold uncertainty without being destabilized by it, that can be fully present to what is actually happening rather than being consumed by what the untrained mind generates about it, this architecture was not there. Because it is not built through knowing. It is built through practice. Through the daily, consistent, patient, unglamorous repetition of the specific exercises that the Stoics developed for exactly this purpose. This distinction, between knowing and having, between the philosophy understood and the philosophy practiced, is the most important thing that this video is built around. And it is the most important thing that most people do not genuinely act on. Not because they do not agree with the distinction. They do. Not because they find the practices unimportant. They understand them to be essential. But because the comfort of the knowing produces a specific, genuine, completely deceptive feeling of having. A feeling that is indistinguishable from the real thing until the circumstances that test the real thing arrive and reveal its absence. Do not wait for those circumstances. Train now. While the training has time to build what it needs to build before the circumstances that require it arrive. Because they will arrive. For everyone. In some form. With some force. And the person who has trained will meet them with genuine interior resources. And the person who has only known will meet them with the gap between the knowing and the having. What the trained mind actually is, the precise Stoic understanding. The trained mind is not the mind that feels nothing. Not the mind that has achieved a kind of permanent philosophical serenity that genuine difficulty cannot penetrate. Not the mind that operates from a position of calm superiority to the ordinary turbulence of human experience. This is the caricature that makes the training seem both unappealing and unrealistic. And the caricature is wrong in both respects. The trained mind, in the genuine Stoic understanding, is the mind that has developed specific capacities that the untrained mind lacks. Not perfect capacities. Not invulnerable capacities. Genuinely developed ones that function better, more reliably, and more productively in the specific conditions that genuine human life delivers. The first specific capacity is the pause. The specific ability to create genuine space between the stimulus, the event, the provocation, the difficulty, the loss, and the response. Not a large space necessarily. Sometimes a breath is sufficient. But genuine space. The space in which the responding part of the mind, the part that chooses rather than the part that reacts, has time to engage before the response is expressed. The untrained mind has essentially no pause. The stimulus produces the reaction with the seamless automaticity of a reflex. Something difficult happens and the mind immediately generates the catastrophized interpretation, the defensive response, the rumination, the anxiety about implications, the specific emotional weather that the untrained processing of difficulty reliably produces. Without choice. Without examination. Without the specific engagement of the choosing part of the mind that genuine training makes available. The trained mind has built the pause through the specific practice of creating it, repeatedly, in circumstances of increasing difficulty, until the creation of it becomes less effortful and more natural. Until it begins to appear spontaneously in situations where the untrained mind would have produced an immediate reaction. Until the space between stimulus and response is genuinely available rather than theoretically present but practically inaccessible. Victor built this pause in the cell. Not immediately. Over months of deliberate, daily practice. By returning, again and again, in the specific circumstances that the cell provided, to the specific exercise of noticing the stimulus before reacting to it. Of naming the interpretive process that was converting external events into interior experience. Of creating, in the naming and the noticing, the space in which a different response became possible. The second specific capacity is the honest examination of interpretation. The trained mind can see, in real time, the difference between what is actually happening and what the mind is making of what is happening. Between the event and the story about the event. Between the fact and the judgment about the fact. This seeing, this specific, real-time awareness of the interpretive process that the mind is continuously performing, is not natural. It is built. Through the practice of honest self-examination, through the daily review of the mind's outputs against the standard of accurate rather than automatic, through the specific exercises that the Stoics developed for exactly the purpose of making the interpretive process visible rather than invisible. When the interpretive process is visible, it becomes available for examination. And examination changes it. The catastrophized interpretation, seen clearly as a catastrophized interpretation rather than as an accurate assessment of reality, loses much of its power to determine the subsequent experience. Not because the examination eliminates the difficulty, but because the examination introduces the accuracy that the automatic catastrophizing had been replacing. The third specific capacity is the deliberate direction of attention. The trained mind can direct its attention with genuine intention rather than having its attention captured by whatever is most emotionally salient or most immediately stimulating. It can choose what to engage with and for how long. It can redirect from the ruminated past and the anticipated future to the actual present with genuine effectiveness rather than with the frustrating, ephemeral redirection of the untrained mind that returns immediately to the rumination or the anticipation it was attempting to leave. This capacity is built through the practice of deliberate attention direction, through the specific daily exercises of redirecting attention from the automatic to the chosen, repeatedly, until the redirection becomes more effective and the automatic capture becomes less complete. Until the mind that was previously governed entirely by what demanded its attention begins to be governed at least partially by the genuine intentions of the person directing it. The fourth specific capacity is the genuine release of what cannot be controlled. Not the performance of acceptance, the external behavioral compliance with what is unavoidable while maintaining the internal resistance and resentment that genuine acceptance would dissolve. but genuine release. The specific interior movement from resistance to acceptance that changes the experience of the unavoidable in the most fundamental way available. Victor built this capacity in the 9x6 space. Because the 9x6 space provided, with unusual completeness, the specific conditions that the practice of genuine release requires. The unavoidable was genuinely unavoidable. There was no possibility of managing the circumstances into something more acceptable. The circumstances were what they were. The only available variable was the interior relationship with them. And through the specific, daily, repeatedly practiced interior exercise of releasing what was genuinely not his to control, the duration of the incarceration, the opinions of the people outside, the circumstances he would encounter when the door eventually opened, he built something that the exterior freedom he had previously taken for granted had never required him to build. The genuine interior freedom of the person who has learned to hold their circumstances without being held by them. Why training must happen before it is needed, the specific urgency. There is a specific and important reason that the title of today's exploration contains the urgency it contains. Before it is too late. Not as dramatic flair. As the accurate description of the relationship between when the training is built and when it is needed. The training does not work when it is first attempted. This is among the most important things to understand about the Stoic practices and about any genuine interior development. The first time you practice the pause in a genuine moment of difficulty, it is not reliably available. The first time you attempt the honest examination of interpretation when the interpretation is carrying significant emotional charge, the examination is partial and the emotional charge is still largely governing. The first time you attempt the genuine release of what you cannot control when what you cannot control is something you genuinely care about, the release is incomplete and the resistance is still substantially present. The practices work, genuinely, reliably, with the force that the genuine moments of need require, after they have been practiced long enough and consistently enough that the specific neurological patterns they build have achieved sufficient density to actually function under the pressure of real difficulty. This takes time. Not indefinite time. But genuine time. Months of consistent practice begin to produce genuine change in the specific capacities. Years of consistent practice produce the specific quality of trained mind that the most genuinely difficult circumstances can test and find genuinely functional. The urgency is this: the genuinely difficult circumstances do not announce themselves in advance. They do not provide a period of preparation between the announcement of their arrival and the actual moment of need. They arrive. And the person who encounters them either has the training or they do not. There is no middle option of beginning the training in the moment the training is needed, because the moment the training is needed is the moment least suitable for beginning it. Victor knew the philosophy when he entered the cell. He had to begin the training from inside the circumstances that required it fully operational. It was the most difficult possible starting point. Not impossible, he built genuine capacity even under those conditions. But considerably more difficult and considerably slower than it would have been had the training preceded the circumstances. You have the advantage of time. Of training in the relatively comfortable conditions of the present before the genuinely difficult conditions of the future arrive to require what the training provides. This advantage is genuinely significant. It means the training has time to produce the genuine neurological patterns, the pause, the examination, the attention direction, the genuine release, before those patterns are needed under the pressure that makes genuine building much harder. Use the advantage. Not eventually. Now. Because the circumstances are coming. Not as pessimism. As the accurate recognition of what a human life contains and what the training is designed to enable the meeting of. The training before the need is the only training that is fully available in the moment of need. The specific training practices, what they are and how they build the mind that the difficult moments require. The Stoic tradition is not short on guidance about the specific practices that constitute genuine mind training. These are not vague recommendations for better thinking. They are specific, daily, practically applicable exercises that the Stoics themselves used and that the research on effective mental training consistently confirms as genuinely productive. The morning philosophical orientation, the practice that governs everything. The single most important practice in the entire Stoic training system is the morning orientation. Not because mornings are philosophically special. Because the quality of the interior with which a day is met determines, more than any other single factor, the quality of the interior's engagement with everything the day provides. The untrained mind wakes and immediately begins processing the external world. The phone. The news. The messages. The list of what needs to be done and the specific anxiety about whether the capacity to do it is sufficient. The day begins on external terms. The interior is immediately occupied by external demands. And the specific philosophical orientation, the reminder of what is genuinely within control and what is not, the reminder of what matters and what does not, the reminder of who you are working toward being and what the day is likely to require from that person, this orientation never occurs. The trained mind wakes and before the external demands arrive, creates a specific space for the interior to be deliberately oriented. Not long. Not elaborate. The specific, brief, genuinely engaged practice of returning the mind to its philosophical foundation before the day begins pulling it toward its various urgencies. Marcus Aurelius did this. His journals are full of the morning practice, the specific philosophical reminders, the deliberate orientation toward the day's likely demands, the patient return to the understanding that grounds everything else. Not as inspiration. As training. As the specific exercise of returning the mind to its genuine foundation before the day begins its continuous attempt to pull it away from that foundation. The practice involves the specific, honest anticipation of the day's likely difficulties. What is genuinely likely to arrive that will test the specific capacities the training is building? Where will the pause be most needed and most challenged? Where will the temptation to react rather than choose be most powerful? Where will the catastrophizing be most tempting? Where will the release of what cannot be controlled be most genuinely difficult? This anticipation is not anxiety generation. It is the specific preparation of the mind for the exercise it is about to be given. The athlete who knows what the training session will demand is better prepared for the session than the athlete who encounters the demands unprepared. The mind that has specifically anticipated the day's training opportunities is better prepared to use them productively than the mind that encounters them as surprises. This practice, maintained consistently across months and years, builds the specific orientation capacity that the trained mind possesses. The ability to return to the philosophical foundation quickly, reliably, even under the pressure of genuine difficulty, because the return has been practiced thousands of times in the conditions that the morning practice provides. The interpretive audit, seeing what the mind is making of what happens. Throughout the day, the trained mind engages in what might be called the interpretive audit. The ongoing, practiced awareness of the specific stories the mind is constructing about the events it is encountering. The continuous, gentle examination of the gap between what is actually happening and what the mind is making of what is happening. This practice is built through the specific daily exercise of catching the interpretation in progress. Of noticing, in the moment of its generation, the specific story the mind is telling about the specific event. And then asking the question that genuine examination requires, is this story accurate? Is this interpretation the most accurate available account of what is actually happening? Or is it the most emotionally charged, the most catastrophized, the most self-referential account, the one that the automatic mind generates by default rather than the one that genuine examination would produce? The practice begins with the less charged events. The mild frustration. The small disappointment. The minor social friction. Because the interpretation of minor events is more accessible to examination than the interpretation of major ones. The examination can occur with more clarity and less distortion. The gap between the automatic story and the accurate one is more visible. And the practice of seeing this gap in minor events builds the capacity to see it in major ones. Victor practiced this in the cell by applying the examination to the specific interpretations his mind was generating about the circumstances of his imprisonment. The story that his life was ruined. The story that the people he had known had abandoned him. The story that the future was closed. The story that the suffering he was experiencing was permanent rather than specific and temporary. Each of these stories was the automatic mind's contribution to the experience of the circumstances. None of them was the accurate account. The life was altered, not ruined. Some people had distanced themselves, but others had maintained contact with specific care. The future was genuinely uncertain, not closed. The suffering was real and significant but specifically located in time rather than permanent. The examination, the practiced, daily, patient examination of the stories against the standard of accuracy, changed the experience of the circumstances in ways that the circumstances themselves had not changed. Because the experience was generated by the stories at least as much as by the circumstances. And the stories, examined honestly, could be revised toward accuracy. And accuracy, in these conditions, produced a genuinely different experience than the catastrophized automatic version had been producing. The deliberate attention practice, training the mind's capacity to choose what it engages with. The Stoics understood attention as the most fundamental resource of the interior life. Not time. Not energy in the physical sense. Attention, the specific engagement of the conscious mind with what it is directed at, determines the quality of experience more directly and more completely than any other single factor. And the untrained mind's attention is almost entirely at the mercy of what demands it. It goes where the strongest pull directs it. To the most emotionally salient content. To the most immediately threatening or most urgently stimulating experience available. To the ruminated past and the anticipated future rather than the actual present. The practice of training the attention is the practice of deliberately directing it. Of regularly, specifically, intentionally choosing what the mind engages with and practicing the maintenance of that chosen engagement against the pull of the automatic redirection. The simplest and most immediately available form of this practice is the practice of single-task genuine presence. The deliberate, specific, maintained engagement with what is actually happening in the actual moment, this conversation, this meal, this walk, this work, without the simultaneous management of what is not happening in the actual moment. This practice sounds simple. It is genuinely demanding. Because the untrained mind is accustomed to the simultaneous management of multiple streams of experience. Of doing this while reviewing that and planning for the other. Of being physically present somewhere while mentally inhabiting the past conversation or the anticipated challenge. The practice of genuinely single-task presence, of being actually here rather than partially here, is the specific training exercise that builds the attention's capacity for genuine direction. Victor practiced this in the cell by engaging completely with what was actually available in the 9x6 space. The texture of the concrete floor. The quality of the light from the high window at different times of day. The specific contents of the books he was given access to. The genuine engagement with the actual writing he began to do. Not because these things were fascinating in themselves. Because the practice of genuinely engaging with them, of actually being present to what was actually available, was building the specific attention capacity that the circumstances outside the cell would eventually require. The voluntary discomfort practice, building the tolerance that genuine difficulty requires. Seneca was explicit about this practice. The deliberate, regular practice of voluntary difficulty, of choosing, in the relatively comfortable conditions of ordinary life, to experience the specific discomforts that the ordinary management of comfort works to prevent. Not for its own sake. For the specific capacity it builds. The practiced knowledge, derived from direct experience rather than from theory, that discomfort can be met and survived without the catastrophizing and the desperate management that the untrained mind applies to it. This knowledge is genuinely transformative in the moments when difficulty is not voluntary. Because the person who has never practiced discomfort encounters it with the full force of its novelty and its apparent threat. The person who has regularly practiced it encounters it as familiar territory. Territory that has been visited enough times to know that it does not actually contain what the untrained mind's panic suggests it contains. The specific practices are available at every level of commitment. The cold shower that is chosen rather than endured. The difficult conversation that is initiated rather than deferred. The meal skipped to practice the specific capacity for appetite without immediate satisfaction. The comfortable routine disrupted to practice the equanimity that disruption requires. Each of these small, voluntary, regularly practiced discomforts adds to the specific interior evidence that the trained mind accumulates, the evidence that difficulty is workable. That the feared condition, when actually encountered, is considerably more manageable than the fear of it suggested. That the capacity for genuine equanimity in difficulty is not a distant ideal but an actual, directly experienceable state that the practice makes progressively more accessible. The evening examination, the honest accounting that makes the training cumulative. Everything the day produced, all of the training opportunities, all of the moments where the practices were employed or were not employed, all of the specific circumstances where the mind met the day with trained capacity or fell back into untrained reactivity, all of this requires honest examination before the day is released into the past. Not punishment. Audit. The specific, patient, fair assessment of where the training is producing genuine change and where it is still primarily theoretical. Where the pause was available and used. Where the examination of interpretation changed the experience and where the automatic story governed unchecked. Where the attention was genuinely directed and where it was captured by whatever demanded it. Where the voluntary practice was engaged and where the comfort was preferred. This examination does several things that make the training cumulative rather than merely repeated. It converts specific days' experience into specific information about where the training needs more deliberate attention. The specific circumstances where the pause was most difficult to create, examined honestly, tell you where tomorrow's practice most needs to be concentrated. The specific stories where the catastrophizing was most resistant to examination tell you where the interpretive audit practice needs to go deeper. This information, gathered honestly and used deliberately, makes each day's practice more targeted and therefore more productive than the day that preceded it. It also produces the honest acknowledgement of genuine progress that genuine training requires. Because the training does not feel like progress on a daily basis. The neurological changes it is building are gradual and not directly visible in single-day increments. The honest examination that compares today's practice to last month's practice, to 6 months ago's practice, to the person who began the training before any of it had been built, this comparison is what makes the progress visible. And visible progress is what sustains the practice through the periods where it feels like nothing is changing. And it completes the day. Genuinely. With the honest accounting that makes the release of the day into the past a genuine release rather than a carrying forward of unfinished interior business into the night. The philosophical study practice, keeping the training intellectually grounded. The Stoics were insistent that genuine mind training required ongoing intellectual engagement with the philosophical ideas that the practices are built from. Not because knowing is the same as having, we have established that it is not. But because knowing provides the understanding that orients the practice. That explains why the practices produce what they produce. That reconnects the daily exercises to the deeper understanding from which their meaning derives. Victor read in the cell. Voraciously and specifically. Not for entertainment. For the direct instruction that the texts contain. For the specific philosophical understanding that the practices are built from. For the renewed orientation toward the ideas that the daily practice was embodying. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journals as a form of philosophical study, not the record of events or achievements but the ongoing engagement with the ideas that were informing and orienting the practice of his life. The specific thinking through of the philosophical understanding as applied to the specific circumstances of the specific day. The patient renewal of the intellectual orientation that the practical demands of the day were continuously attempting to erode. The practice of regular philosophical study, of ongoing, genuine engagement with the Stoic texts and the ideas they contain, is itself a training practice. It builds the specific cognitive familiarity with the philosophical framework that makes the framework available in the moment it is needed. That makes the question "Am I on the right side of the line?" a natural first question in moments of difficulty rather than a remembered philosophical position that has to be consciously retrieved. What the trained mind produces, the compounding transformation across a life. The person who trains the mind consistently, who maintains the morning orientation, the interpretive audit, the deliberate attention practice, the voluntary discomfort, the evening examination, and the ongoing philosophical study across months and years of genuine practice, becomes, gradually and genuinely, a different kind of person from the one they were at the beginning of the training. Not dramatically different in any single way. Significantly different in the aggregate of 1,000 specific capacities that the training has built. They are more genuinely present to the actual moments of their actual life. Because the attention that the untrained mind scattered across the past and future and the multiple simultaneous streams of experience has been partially consolidated, through practice, into the genuine presence to what is actually happening. The meals that are actually tasted. The conversations that are actually heard. The people who are actually seen rather than processed. The specific texture of the specific day that is actually inhabited rather than moved through in the distracted management of everything that is not actually here. They are more reliably equanimous in the face of genuine difficulty. Not invulnerable. Not without genuine feeling when genuine difficulty arrives. But the space between the difficulty and the destabilization is genuinely larger. The return to the philosophical foundation genuinely faster. The specific processing of difficulty genuinely more effective and genuinely less expensive in the interior resources that the processing consumes. They are more genuinely free from the chronic suffering that the untrained mind generates from neutral and difficult circumstances alike. Not from all suffering. The genuine suffering of genuine loss remains. The genuine pain of genuine difficulty remains. But the specific additional, self-generated suffering that the untrained mind adds to every challenging experience, the catastrophizing, the personalizing, the ruminating, the anticipating, this diminishes. Gradually. Not completely. But significantly. In ways that change the daily experience of being alive in measurable and meaningful ways. Victor walked out of the cell 2 years after walking into it. And the years after the cell, years that contained their own genuine difficulty, their own genuine complexity, their own genuine demands on the capacity he had built, were genuinely different from the years before it. Not easier. Not protected from what genuine living delivers. But met by a genuinely different person. By someone who had built, in the most demanding available conditions, the specific interior architecture that the Stoics had always been pointing toward. He told the story later. In a book. With the specific honesty of someone who had learned the hard way what knowing and training are different things and what the difference costs when the circumstances require the training that the knowing cannot substitute for. He wrote, "I was a philosopher who had never done philosophy. I was a teacher of the practices who had never practiced. And when the circumstances arrived that required the practices to be genuinely available, I discovered what I should have discovered while there was still time to build them in comfort rather than in crisis. That the training is the philosophy. That knowing it is the preparation for doing it. That doing it, daily, consistently, unglamorously, in the specific circumstances of the specific life you are actually living, is the only way the philosophy becomes what it was always designed to be. Genuinely operational. Actually available. A real resource in the moments of real need rather than an intellectual possession that the moments of real need reveal to be useless without the practice that knowledge alone cannot substitute for. Do not learn this the way Victor learned it. Do not wait for the 9x6 space to make the training necessary in a form that makes it considerably harder. Train now. In the space you currently occupy. In the relatively comfortable conditions of the life you currently have. Before the circumstances arrive that will reveal, with the specific completeness that genuine difficulty provides, whether the training you have done is sufficient for the moments the training was built to meet. The beginning of the training, what tomorrow morning actually requires. Tomorrow morning, the training begins. Not with the elaborate program. Not with the comprehensive overhaul. With the single, specific, immediately actionable practice that the morning provides. Before the phone. Before the news. Before the day's external demands begin their reliable capture of the interior's available attention. Create the space. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. The time that the practice requires rather than the time that is left over after everything else has claimed its portion. In that space, do the morning orientation. The specific, honest, brief engagement with the philosophical foundation. What is actually within your control today and what is not? What genuine difficulty is the day likely to provide and what will meeting it with genuine training look like? What specific practice, the pause, the interpretive audit, the attention direction, needs the most deliberate concentration today based on where yesterday's examination revealed the training to be least developed? These questions, engaged with genuinely for a few minutes before the day begins, constitute the morning orientation practice. They are not elaborate. They are genuine. And the genuine engagement with them, maintained consistently across days and weeks and months, builds the specific philosophical orientation capacity that the trained mind possesses. Then move through the day with the specific intention of a person who is in training. Who understands that the day's events, including and especially its difficulties, are the training material. Who brings to each specific moment the specific practice that the moment provides the opportunity to exercise. And in the evening, the honest examination. The fair, patient, specific review of where the training was genuinely engaged and where it was not. The extraction of the specific information that tomorrow's practice can be built from. And the complete release of the day into the past. This is the practice. Not the once-a-week practice. The daily practice. The practice that the Stoics themselves maintained because they understood that the mind that is not being consistently trained is being consistently untrained by the enormous and continuous pressure of the untrained world that surrounds it. Victor trained in a 9x6 space because that was the only space he had. You have more. Use it. Not eventually. Now. Tomorrow morning. Before the circumstances arrive that require what only the training can build. Subscribe to Stoic Ascension right now. Turn on your notifications. Every single video on this channel is built for exactly this depth and exactly this urgency. The philosophy that is not just worth knowing but genuinely worth practicing. The training that is not just interesting to consider but genuinely necessary to build. Before the circumstances arrive that will reveal, with complete honesty, whether you have built it. What comes after this builds directly on everything you just heard. Every video goes deeper into the practice of a mind that is genuinely trained rather than merely informed. Victor knew the philosophy for 20 years before he trained in it. He needed 2 years in a 9x6 cell to discover the difference. You have the advantage of knowing the difference now. While there is still time to build it in comfort rather than in crisis. The training is available. The time is now. Before it is too late. Begin.